Hey everybody, it's Charles, your hobby hero, coming at you today with our second video in our series breaking down the Starter Deck Challenge format. Today we'll be looking at the Steel and Sapphire deck, which is the deck that I actually went 3-0 with at Gen Con. Before we get started though, make sure you hit that subscribe button down in the bottom corner. I do appreciate it. I do put out regular content about the hobbies that I love the most, with this channel being dedicated to the card games that I play. Now, I will say that despite going 3-0 with this deck, when you look at this deck initially, it looks very bad, and I think this is probably the most misleading deck out of the box that you can get into. The deck is definitely set up to be a ramp style deck, but I think its biggest strength is actually its early game aggressive play. We're going to jump into the deck list here, kind of look at those cards, the curve of the deck. We're going to break down which cards I would take out if you are adding additional cards to your starter deck, and which cards I would mulligan for aggressively if I'm playing. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump in. All right, guys, we're going to jump into the deck list here first and foremost. Starting with our 1-drops, we've got Flounder, 2 for 1. We have 2 of them in there. He is a 1-drop who's inkable, trades pretty favorably with most 1-drops. Captain Hook, another 1-drop here. We have 3 copies of him. He's got Challenger 2. This actually lets him trade up with quite a few of the 2-drops and even 3-drops in the game. So very good 1-drop here. A lot of times you're just going to play this guy and he is just going to sit there staring at your opponent's character that they don't want to lose to your 1-drop, which is perfectly fine. And another set of goons here in the 1-drop spot. 2 more, 2 2s for 1, with a total of 7 1-drops. Very nice compared to a lot of the other decks in their 1-drop spots. All these trade very favorable with a lot of the other 1-drops as well. From there, we go into our 2-drops. We have 3 copies of the 2-drop Aurora, which is extremely nice. She's got that 2 lore generation, the only one in the starter decks that has a 2 lore generator in the 2-drop spot, and we have 3 copies of that card. She trades pretty favorably still as well, and she can be protected with this deck, which is also nice. We have Grandma Tala. She's a 2-drop inkable 1/1. When she's banished, she goes to your ink zone. It's kind of understated, but decent enough. Most people are going to leave her alone, which means she's a free 1 lore generation for the duration of the game. Occasionally, she can swing in and finish off a character too, which is not bad either. We have Prince Eric, another solid 2-drop, 1/3 Challenger of 2, which means he's going to trade into, again, 2-drops, well, pretty much all 2-drops, most 3-drops, and a couple of 4-drops with that 3 power when he challenges. Very nice. With that 3 toughness too, he's going to survive a lot of the early exchanges when he challenges, so I really like that. Another pseudo removal card for the deck. Starting strong in the 3-drop spots, we have a 3/3 2 lore generator at 2 copies with Jasmine disguised. We have Mickey Detective. Mickey's kind of that one of those cards that I say kind of makes this deck feel like a trap. He's not inkable. His body is pretty terrible as far as tempo goes. You know, as a 1/3 1 lore generator, he's really not what you want to be playing on turn 3. But they kind of trick you into thinking this is a ramp deck, and he is a good ramp card. Unfortunately, not a huge fan of this guy, especially not 3 copies in the deck. Hercules, on the other hand, here, though, 3/3 bodyguard, 1 lore generator. Very nice. Like I said, a good way to protect a lot of these 2 lore generators that you have early. Kristoff, we have another 3-drop, 3/3 for 2 lore generator. So that brings a total of 4 copies of 3-drop 2 lore generators in the deck, which is very, very strong. We have Aurora Briar Rose here as a 2/5 1 lore generator. 3 copies of this card. When you play this character, chosen character gets -2 strength this turn. She, in my opinion, is kind of a worse version of the 3-drop Maximus for Amber. Not terrible. I would like to have seen her at 4 be a 2 lore generator instead of 1 lore generator. She can trade very favorably with the early game characters that they'll be playing. You know, often being a 2 for 1, possibly even a 3 for 1 if they let her stick around. but I don't know if it's enough of a trade-off. A lot of times she does end up in my ink well, but she can be very impactful. And again, being inkable is nice as well. We have Maleficent in the 4-drop spot. 3 copies of this card as well. 2 lore generator, 3/4 body. She's going to be trading favorably with your opponents. 3 drops most times, and sticking around to generate that 2 lore. All right, next up we have Aurora, the Dreaming Guardian. We have her as a 1-of in the deck. And 3/5 for 5 with 2 lore is nothing crazy. Now, her biggest advantage in this is the Protective Embrace. Your other characters gain ward. It's not super important in the limited deck battles, as there's not a ton of targeted removal, and honestly, there's not much that they're going to be targeting of yours that's better than hers. So I don't really put a whole lot of emphasis on getting her into play. This shift ability, I would never use that. Getting her down early and risking being 2-for-1 with a removal spell that deals with her is just not worthwhile. But again, for a 2 lore generator for 5, she's fine. Most times I do end up inking her, but there are going to be those situations where she can be very clutch depending on the matchups. Then we have Maleficent, the Uninvited, another 5-drop that's inkable, 3 lore generator, our first 3 lore generator in the deck. Very nice stats, very powerful card. Now, we'll put the caveat on here with the way that I prefer to play this deck. 5 is usually about the top end that you are looking at. We don't always even get to there. This deck plays very fast and very wide. So getting to 5 may not always happen, but we have some really excellent options in that 5. But just keep that in mind whenever you're trying to make a decision on what to ink and hands to mulligan and whatnot. That is something I would keep in mind, is that 5 is kind of your top end in this particular deck, despite the fact that, again, it is kind of labeled as a ramp deck. We have Beast to finish out this row here, hard-headed. 4/4, 2 lore generator for 5. Nothing special there. His break ability is not going to come into effect too often. There's probably 2 items that get played amongst all the decks. The Divine Shield for red, or the Shield of Virtue, rather, and then the Coconut Baskets are 2 that can see some play. Most often than not, he's not going to have a target for this break, and even if he does, it's not going to be like game-shattering usually. He is inkable, though, and is a 2 lore generator, which makes him a nice top deck at the end. And if you get him in the beginning, usually just goes into your inkwell. Simba, on the other hand, here is probably the worst card we have in the opening, or in the pack right out of the box, rather. He's a 5-drop, which, again, we just mentioned, don't always get to 5. He is uninkable, which means he's not going to help you get to 5. Very understated for the 5-drops that are going to get played here, which makes his ability to gain 1 lore when he banishes a character in a challenge much less relevant. The 3 strength is going to be basically able to take care of 3 drops or lower. And then, like I said, obviously at 5-drop spot, he's not going to be able to exchange favorably with any other 5-drops. He does have 2 lore with 5 willpower, which isn't terrible. But again, at 5, we have better options. And being uninkable, unfortunately, it's a hindrance to the deck to keep him in. Mufasa here at the 6-drop spot. A vanilla character, but 3 lore generator with 4/6 stats. So slightly upstatted from our 5-drop Maleficent. Very rarely do we get to 6, but he's inkable, so he will help us get there even if we get him early. And if we do happen to get there, you're not going to be upset to drop a 3 lore generator with those stats. Similarly, Scar here, singleton copy, 5/4, so a little understated from Mufasa. I do find it ironic that he is stronger than Mufasa is. And we have him being inkable with a 2 lore generation. His Insidious Plot is just like a huge, Maximus horse kick. And it honestly usually very rarely has a target that it's going to be much more than a -2 or 3 anyways. It can come into effect on turn 6. Getting a 2 lore generator isn't terrible. And again, the fact that he's inkable isn't bad either. Next up is Simba at our 7-drop spot. I think he's not as good as Aladdin or Facilier in the other 2 decks, but he is inkable, which is nice. Again, 7's probably not going to get in play very often in this deck, but if he does get in play, Challenger 4 pretty much takes out any character you would want to challenge in the limited deck battles. The Pounce ability can also help deal with some more challenging evasive characters. So he's not terrible if you get him into play, but more often than not, just ink, but he is inkable, which is nice. Maui, on the other hand, is garbage. You are never going to get to 8 in this deck, and if you do, you're probably not going to have Maui because you probably did what you should have and inked him earlier on in the game. Even if you do get him into play, he's not much of a difference maker for as expensive as he is. It's one of the first cards I'd probably take out. Just doesn't do enough for the cost, even in play. So out of the box, he's ink. Later on, I try to take him out for pretty much anything else. Develop Your Brain is very nice. This card actually scales pretty well compared to a lot of the filler actions that you're going to see in a lot of the decks. This is actually not a terrible top deck late in the game, because you basically get to pay 1 ink to draw the best of the next 2 cards that you have on the top of your deck. Now, early in the game, I would not sacrifice playing creatures on curve to play this early. I usually ink it early in the game, but the fact that it is a nice top deck late is also nice. Fire the Cannons as a 3-of, very nice, very staple removal spell. It's going to help get you that tempo that you need to start the game when you're drawing and focusing on going wide on the board. This is going to let you clear early challengers for only 1, so you can still stay relatively close on curve. Ransack here is basically just ink. There's no way to net cards off of this card. It is only good if you have lots of bad cards in your hand. You can get rid of those and hopefully get better cards in your hand for the cost of a card. It is inkable though, so that is not terrible. You just put it into your ink zone. Smash here is our next one up. 3 damage to chosen character. This one's even inkable. Similar to the Fire the Cannons, this is a solid piece of removal. It's going to help deal with pesky cards like Pongo, or just help keep the field clear from cards that would be challenging. After a Jafar challenges, this allows you to maybe finish it off without him being able to swing back at one of your characters again. Just a lot of damage off the top, and if you don't need it, it is inkable, which is nice as well. We get into our songs down here. We have our 1 jump ahead. This card is terrible in this format. It is seeing some constructed play, but it is not inkable. It makes it a terrible draw throughout. You basically have to pay it or play it because it just sits in your hand if you don't. And all it really does is generates 1 ink, which any inkable card would do, unless it happens to jump you 1 turn ahead to get to the drop that you need to get to. But in a long game, especially one where you don't have lots of multiples of the cards you would want to ramp into, it's really kind of pointless to try to be targeting specific turns. And this deck, again, goes very wide very early, and this card just throws that tempo way off if you have to spend your 2-drop turn playing this instead of something like an Aurora. Grab Your Swords, though, is absolutely busted. This card is probably the best card in all of the sealed decks. Deals 2 damage to each opposing character. This card generally will win you the game if you play it, often 3 or 4 for wanting your opponent while leaving your guys completely untouched. This card is insane and probably the only 5-drop or uninkable card I would keep in my opening hand. We get into our items. Magic Golden Flower is pretty terrible, situationally useful at best, but it is inkable, which is nice. Coconut Baskets, you have 3 of them in here. You'd only ever probably want to play 1. It can be absolutely game-changing late game to have this and have a board full of characters that can challenge and then heal up afterwards. However, again, if you're playing this deck correctly, you're probably going to be playing too aggressive to want to spend 2 on this. But again, it is inkable as well. Frying Pan is just ink. Don't play this card. It has almost no use whatsoever in play. All right, so you can take a look here, kind of the breakdown of the deck. Now, we mentioned the last deck, the red, the Ruby, and Emerald deck had 12 non-inkables. This one's got 11. And you might be thinking, well, you know, you talked about how detrimental those 11 or 12 were to the other deck. This one's only got 11. But as you can see, like, our curve is much more focused on our lower drops here, with even the non-inkables, with the exception of like Grab Your Sword and the 5-drop Simba, being mostly lower costing cards, like your Fire the Cannons. So like, you don't run into the same issues because your top end is going to be lower. I said we're probably going to be curving out right here. This is kind of the sweet spot of this deck, 1 through 4. And having 11 uninkables isn't going to dramatically reduce our ability from getting 1 to 4. I do think you are going to target a few of those uninkables to be removed, which we'll get into here up next. But I just kind of wanted to highlight that, why, even though this one has close to the same number of uninkables as the Emerald Ruby deck, it's really not comparable just due to how much lower the curve is for this deck versus the Ruby and Emerald deck. All right, so now we have the cards that I would take out if you are adding in additional cards from the pack that comes in it for the starter deck challenge, if it's ran similarly to the ones that were at Gen Con. I've got 14 cards listed as basically suboptimal cards for the deck. Now, obviously, we'll break down which ones are the highest priority, because at best, you're only going to be able to add 12 cards to this deck anyways. So we'll start with the uninkables here. Simba and Mickey Mouse. Simba and Mickey Mouse, neither one of them are really going to contribute to your win condition. Both of them are pretty terrible top decks. Mickey Mouse more so than Simba. It's going to free up 5 cards worth of space, so you may not end up taking out all of them. But these two are ones that I would focus on. Again, not being inkable and not really helping you win the game are both pretty terrible. Generally speaking, you're going to be able to find any combination of cards that are going to move the needle a bit more for you in that discretion. Maui is another one here. Again, he is just an ink card at this point. Like, you're just not going to play him. There's very little you're going to be able to get out of your starter deck that's going to allow you to play him. But he is inkable, so if you need to leave a card in just as an inkable resource, you have that as well. The action here, Ransack. Again, the card is just ink, which may be good enough if you don't have something in your pack to upgrade it. Any inkable character, for the most part, would be an upgrade to this under 4 cost, as long as it has the ability to produce lore and has some stat line. Probably a better option than Ransack here. One jump ahead. This is probably the #1 card that needs to come out. Again, it's not a character. It has no power, has no ability to generate lore for you. It's anti-tempo to kind of the way you want to play this deck to be successful. And so that's just the #1 card here. If you have only 2 impactful cards to add to the deck, this is the 2 that I would take out first and foremost. And then that takes us to our items. These cards are both inkable, so if you have to leave them in, you can. They're basically just ink, though, in your deck. Not even really situational on like Frying Pan. Like, there's just very few times, if ever, this card is going to be worth actually playing for 2. Where Magic Golden Flower could have some ability, if you make it to your top end, to help save a character from that. But you have the coconut baskets in here, so you have a way to heal if that game arises. So both of these are also ones that I would target for it. But as you can see, like, there's, out of all these here, there are 2, 5, 6, 7 of them are uninkable, which kind of get my higher priority. And like I said, you're not running a really high curve, so you can actually afford to run a few more uninkables if you just rather leave some of the uninkables in, like Simba and Mickey Mouse, and get rid of some of the cards that really just don't do anything, like Ransack and One Jump Ahead. I would definitely not encourage you to be adding more uninkables without taking some of them out. Because like I said, while it does have a low curve, you do still need to hit that curve right on time to have the most success with the deck. Now we'll go ahead and take a look at the cards that I would mulligan aggressively for, and kind of talk about how I would approach playing this deck in the Starter Deck Challenge format. All right, so here we've got the cards that we would mulligan for. Now, as you can see, there's 15 cards that you would want to mulligan for, which makes this a pretty favorable and easy kind of thing to mulligan towards these objectives. But like I said, the deck is very misleading in being a ramp deck, because this deck strength is definitely its early game. For your 1-drops, it's got a number of 1-drops. I would keep pretty much all of them. Out of the ones that has available to, Captain Hook, Forceful Duelist is probably the highest priority one that I would keep, just because he has the ability to trade up into bigger characters that are out there. Now, Aurora Regal Princess is probably the #1 card I would search for, 2 lore generation on turn 2, if you can keep her out there and keep her protected, is very, very key. Prince Eric, very similar to Captain Hook, another very solid 2-drop that's going to allow you to really threaten all the way up to their 3 and 4 drops. In some situations, it's going to make them not want to either quest with them or to do really unfavorable challenges with them, because you'll be able to finish them off with much smaller characters for the investment. Again, just as important as Aurora, making sure you curve into your 3-drop 2 lore generators. Again, you have 4 of them in the deck as well. So being able to hit these on stride and really just continue to put out 2 up to 3 lore generators into play is insane for this deck. Again, especially in like your Amber Amethyst matchup, like even if they have a favorable board position, they've got a deck full of 1 lore generator, so you're doing twice the work with 1 of your cards. So it's just crazy how much faster this deck can get to 20 than the other ones in that regard. So those are the ones you really want to focus on, is making sure we hit those on curve. And then topping out our character curve really with Maleficent at 4. I definitely wouldn't keep multiple Maleficents in my opening hand, whereas most of these other ones I would probably take multiples of any of them. But 4 is kind of going to be our top end that we're looking for. So just really probably only 1 of them in my opener. Again, just slightly better than the Kristoff and the Jasmine because of that 4 willpower, but she does take a full extra turn to get into play as well. The only song or the only action that I would keep in my opening hand is the Grab Your Sword. You only run 1 copy of it. So, you know, you're running the risk of not seeing it if you don't keep it in your opening hand, and you do want to play this card. This card is worth disadvantageously putting cards into your Inkwell to get to 5 because of the overwhelming effect and one-sided effect that it has. Now, you notice that I don't have Fire the Cannons or Smash on here. You can keep those cards in your opening hand if you have enough of the pieces of the other stuff there. I don't put a ton of priority in them, though, because 1, you're running multiple copies of each. You have 3 Fire the Cannons, 2 Smashes in there, and you do have a Grab the Sword in the deck as well. So I wouldn't focus on those. If I needed these other pieces and they were in my opening hand, I would absolutely mulligan those cards to help try to make sure that I got these other character opening pieces, because they're just much more important. Now, being able to play an Aurora down with like a Smash and a Fire the Cannons in your hand to make sure she's going to stay alive for a while is very nice, and I definitely would not undervalue those cards. But I don't think that I would be willing to trade off possibly not getting an Aurora or getting one of my 3-drops or 4-drop 2 lore generators at the expense of keeping one of those in my hand just in case. Like I said, you'll draw more of them throughout the game, and you really want to make sure you're keeping the pressure on your opponent so that when you do draw one of those, it's going to be absolutely backbreaking for them because they just can't keep up. And now you take away that little bit of hope that maybe they even had. All right, guys, so there you have it. That is my breakdown of the Steel Sapphire starter deck. You may be running those in your starter deck challenges coming up just this weekend, with the pre-release coming up on the 18th of this month. Make sure you guys let me know down in the comment section below what you guys think of this particular starter deck. And until next time, guys, Hobby Hero out.